Welcome back to my real-life ancient horror stories that should be made into horror movies. I'm Carshénah with Productions. This episode is a special treat, so stay tuned. I've got some evil kings and queens who historically existed in ancient times that did some horrific and incredible deeds that should be on camera for the horror fan. Let's get into it. I don't know why Hollywood refuses to do something so out-of-the-box extraordinary like reading a book, but the world is tired of sequels and prequels and remakes. I'm not saying that when one of these categories aren't done well, that it can't give us a whole new perspective from the original and bring the new modern version into its own world. But let's consider this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. In other words, stop it, please. I'll be going over some ancient horror figures that Hollywood needs to take a serious look at and do us all a favor and give us something new. I don't know how many countless times my mom has said to me that all these great stories in the Bible are destined to be made. All of these stories on the History Channel are only giving us 2% of the world's conquering backstories of ancient kings and queens. A lot of them did unspeakable acts to gain this power. If this ain't a start to a new horror movie franchise, then I don't know what is. You've heard of the name. You've heard of how she ruled a kingdom with an iron fist. You've also never heard of anyone named their daughter after her. She's one of a kind, and she's a real historic evil queen. Wife to Ahab and mother of Athaliah. Let's talk about Jezebel. So who was she? Jezebel was the daughter of Ithabal the first of Tyre and the wife of Ahab, king of Israel, in the book of Kings of the Holy Bible. You can find that in 1 Kings 16:31. Jezebel, along with her husband King Ahab, instituted the worship of Baal and Asherah on a national scale. Jezebel is introduced into the biblical narrative as a Sidonian, which biblically translates as a Phoenician princess. Jezebel married King Ahab of Samaria, the northern kingdom of Israel. So what did she do? She violently purged the prophets of God. God had a very special prophet named Elijah, who invited Jezebel's prophets of Baal and Asherah to a challenge at Mount Carmel. The challenge was to see which god, Yahweh or Baal, would burn a bull sacrifice on an altar. Jezebel's prophets failed to summon Baal in burning the bull sacrifice, despite their cries and cutting themselves. Elijah, however, succeeded when he summoned God, also known as Yahweh. He then ordered the people to seize and kill the prophets of Baal and Asherah at the Kishon River. After the prophets were slain, Jezebel swore to have Elijah become like her prophets, i.e., killed, even if it meant embracing divine judgment upon herself if she failed to do so. Elijah fled for his life to the wilderness, where he mourned and cried to God, believing him to be the only worshiper of God left. In another series, I'll go over this specific chapter because it mirrors one of my all-time favorite movie sequels, Evil Dead: Army of Darkness.
Yeah, maybe I'm a Chinese jet pilot.
This is a good example of skeleton warriors coming back to life. Elijah saw these skeletons in the Valley of Dry Bones when God blew the breath of life back into their bony nostrils. Elijah didn't have his boomstick. However, he did witness them dry bones, them dry bones. Anyway, you get the gist. I don't know why Hollywood hasn't even imagined to make this into a horror film yet, but I digress. How wicked was Jezebel? Well, I'm glad you asked. After an unspecified amount of time had passed, Ahab visited Naboth's residence. The residence was located near the royal palace in the city of Jezreel. Wishing to acquire Naboth's vineyard so that he could expand his own gardens, Ahab asked to purchase Naboth's vineyard in exchange for a better quality vineyard or financial compensation. Naboth declined. which he justified by informing Ahab that his vineyard was ancestral property. Ahab returned to his palace sullen and depressed by Naboth's response. In other words, he cried. He was sad. Jezebel decided to console him by arranging for Naboth to be entrapped and later executed on the quote-unquote false charges of blasphemy against God and the king. After Naboth was executed outside the city, his corpse was licked by stray dogs. Jezebel then informed Ahab that he could seize Naboth's vineyard. She was a ride-or-die chick no matter what. She stood by her man. Elijah condemned Ahab for committing theft and murder. As punishment, God decreed Ahab's death himself and the annihilation of his royal line. Jezebel's death was also decreed with her corpse to be devoured by dogs. We see that Jezebel fell from the window and down she went, splat on the streets, and the dogs came a-licking, thus ending her reign. But if you go back to my previous episode, which I'll have it linked here, her evil daughter Athaliah ruled immediately after her. And she killed her own grandkids just to rule for 6 years. Dysfunctional family? I think so. Again, can you imagine the cinematography of these gory details would show? Rituals, slayings, beautiful costumes, maniacal laughing, moo-ha-ha, and blood everywhere. Throw in some dark shadows and a vampire or two and you've got yourself a Hollywood blockbuster. What does Jezebel mean now? Through the centuries, the name Jezebel came to be associated with false prophets. By the early 20th century, it was also associated with fallen or abandoned women. When you were compared to Jezebel, it suggested that a person was a pagan or an apostate, masquerading as a servant of God. By manipulation and seduction, she misled the saints of God into sins of idolatry and sexual immorality. Christians associated Jezebel with promiscuity. The cosmetics which Jezebel applied before her death also led some Christians to associate makeup with vice. So basically, if you put on some rouge or some lipstick, you were a whore, is what they basically were trying to say. Or that you were a woman who was always sleeping around. In the Middle Ages, the chronicler Matthew Paris criticized Isabella of Angoulême, the queen consort of John, King of England, by writing that she was more Jezebel than Isabel. In modern usage, the name of Jezebel is sometimes used as a synonym for sexually promiscuous or controlling women. The Jezebel stereotype is an oppressive image and was used as a justification for sexual assault and sexual servitude. Jezebel in popular culture. The Jezebels is an Australian indie rock band founded in 2007. The band's name is based on the biblical character, whom one band member describes as misunderstood or misrepresented, and an example of how women are really wrongly presented. Paulette Goddard starred as Jezebel in the film Sins of Jezebel in 1953. We've often heard people describe women of leisure as a Jezebel, or men of deceit and betrayal as a Judas type. Either way you slice it, Jezebel is a name that has gone down in history for her wicked and evil ways. The first cosmetics queen to reign with sacrifices and rituals. I wonder what she would have thought about our 21st century makeup today. Can her story be turned into a horror film? Absolutely. Bring on an Angelina Jolie Wicked Queen or an Angela Bassett, and you've got yourself a horror film like no other. Hollywood, I'm waiting. Tune in next time to find out who else should be a horror film with all the wicked things they've done. Thanks for watching and learning about real-life ancient horror stories. Take care, and I'll see you soon.